All right, well, this is the beginning of a new doctrinal study. I mentioned when we first started these, and I'm going to try and do 4 of these a year. They're going to be somewhere between 7 and 12 weeks, depending on what particular doctrine that we are studying. The first one that we looked over was the doctrine of the Bible, otherwise known as bibliology. And I always start with that one because if we don't understand the relevance and the importance of the Bible, then the rest of it really doesn't matter. This is where we get our knowledge of God. This is where we get our moral direction. And so the Bible is just so very, very important to every other piece of understanding that we have. Tonight we're starting what's called Theology Proper. This is literally the doctrine of God. And as we think about that from a Christian context, this is separated from the specific doctrines of the individual members of the Trinity. And so we will cover those at some point. I'm not saying it's going to be this year. I'm not saying it's going to be next year. I don't know what I'm doing next week. And so we're going to get to them eventually, but it is different from the specific doctrines of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, which are paterology, Christology, and pneumatology, respectively. But this is specifically talking about the doctrine of God. And I will just preface this first one, this first little lesson by saying this. When you're in seminary and you get to Theology Proper, the first couple of weeks of Theology Proper we really enjoyed, because it's kind of a separation from theology and you get a little bit more into philosophy. And when you've been doing theology and Bible and everything for 3 years straight, you like a class with a little something extra. I realize this first week is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I promise that what we're condensing into 1 week, what usually takes us 2 or 3, and so let's get through this, and then we will eventually get into some of the what we're used to in terms of theological, biblical study. However, let me just tell you this: as you are engaging, especially younger people, especially college-educated people, those who don't have the background, the church background that many of us have when it comes to God and our understanding of faith and Christianity, this opening section of Theology Proper is going to be very, very important when you're talking with them. I'll also say this: you've got your sheet in front of you. I've got mine right here. All of these red marks right here are additional comments that I have made that are not on your sheet. And so with these things, I would recommend, unless you're just planning on going to sleep, but Jeff Nolan's not here, and so I think all of you are going to be awake. But I would recommend bringing maybe another sheet of paper or a notebook or something if you want to take some notes. I've got a pad up here. You can come up here and rip a page off of that real quickly if you would like, but after this week, not doing that for you either. And so if you would like to make some extra notes, that sort of thing, because as we go through it, I do have to go through this relatively quickly, but at the same time, you wore the wrong outfit to come up here in front of everybody, didn't you? But it happens. It's okay.
Our picture or your picture?
I'm videoing me. It's not you guys. This also, I'm doing this, so we're going to put it up on the YouTube channel. So if you ever miss a week, you can look at it. And I'm not videoing you. If I was, I'd point it away from Gail. And so I'd have it going somewhere else. Yeah. So it's not going at you, I promise. All right. So let's start this up. Theology Proper. It's the branch of theology that discusses who God is. We've already talked about paterology, Christology, pneumatology. These explain the specific persons of the triune God that we serve. And so what is the work of the Father? What is the work of the Son? What is the work of the Spirit in conjunction as the one God of Christianity? This specifically looks at the nature, the being, the attributes, the acts of God. And so you can think of it as what makes him unique, in the same way of what makes all of us unique. So I grew up with an identical twin brother. We are incredibly different people. Even though we grew up in the same house, we're identical twins, so we share the same DNA, and yet we are very, very different people. Why is that? Well, we have different characteristics. We have different personalities. We have different attributes. All of these things make up who we are. This is what we're studying within Theology Proper. What makes up who God is. In this first section, we're going to be looking at the specific understanding of theism. And so this is where we really, not that the Bible defends itself in terms of the fact that there is a God, but this helps us to have confidence going forward that there is, in fact, this personal God who is involved in the everyday workings of our life. And so, as we get into this study, 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Anybody ever read any Nietzsche before? He was a nut, so it's okay. But he declared in his book, The Gay Science, as well as other writings, that God is dead. Have you ever heard that saying before? God is dead. Well, that was Nietzsche. He meant by this that the idea of God had lost its full creative force. And you think about our world today, how influential is the church today versus 100 years ago, versus 200 years ago, versus 300 years ago? Like both science and philosophy, faith only provides meaning that we create from it. This was Nietzsche's understanding. Modernity and post-modernity, these just different eras in the life of civilization, has caused more and more people to embrace Nietzsche's idea that the idea of God was a human creation and has no more power over the world today. However, with that growing percentage of people who hold to that, the majority of the human population around the world still believes in the existence of a higher power. And the majority of them believe in a personal God. Our belief in the existence of God can be categorized in three different ways. First of all is theism. And so theism is the belief that gods exist and that we are capable of knowing who they are and interacting with them. And so Christianity would obviously be an example of theism, but there are many, many different types of theism. Christianity is a type of monotheism, so there is one God. Okay, polytheism means what? Multiple gods. That's right. Pantheism, which is growing incredibly more popular, and I honestly blame Hollywood and some other things for that. God is everywhere. God is in everything. God is made up of all the things in which we see. If you have ever seen Star Wars, that's pantheism. Just the idea that God and everything that holds the world together is everywhere. There's also deism, which actually largely shaped American government, and we've talked a little bit about that before. Deism is the idea, and specifically Christian deism, is the idea that there is a God. He did create the world. He did send his son Jesus to die for us, but after that, he has no more interaction with us. You're on your own, basically, is what deism says. And so, large portion of the founding fathers were Christian deists, and it shows in a lot of the political ideologies, in the sense that if something's going to happen, we're going to have to make it happen. We're going to be the ones who have to take that step, and that's held largely within Western politics for a long, long time. And the idea of picking yourself up by the bootstraps. It's you who does all these things. It's the idea of action more than prayer is sorely pushing its way into the forefront of faith and that sort of thing. But it's still theism. It's still a belief that there is a God. Now there's also atheism. And atheism, or sometimes it's known as humanism or secular humanism. Basically, there is no God. There is no creator. There is nothing that we can pray to that they're going to answer us. There is nothing that happens after you die. It's just, all of life is a result of time and chance. And this is what we have. Atheism, again, is growing, but this is what I want us to think about, and I'll often talk to a lot of my classes about this, because if you were to talk to a very passionate atheist, because as I'm going to explain here in a second, most atheists are actually agnostics, they just don't know it. But if you were to talk to a passionate atheist, what they really want is a world that is separated from all faith, a world that is separated from all religion. And what they don't seem to understand is that atheism itself is a religion. It is something that directs their moral behavior. It is something that guides the decisions that they make in life. And that's what religion does. That's what we exercise faith for, because we believe we found this truth. And this truth then guides our decisions. This truth, it affects how we raise our children. It affects how we interact with our neighbors. Atheism does the same thing. And so as we think about atheism in the context of understanding theology and God, it's important for us to realize that atheism is in itself a religion. It's something that directs their life and their behavior and their morality. And then thirdly, agnosticism. This is sometimes a middle ground between theism and atheism. Agnostics believe that it's possible and even probable. So most of your agnostics will say there probably is a God. But they say that we can't possibly know anything about him, and therefore we should not waste our life serving him, and when we die, whatever happens, happens. All right. That is the definition of a theological crapshoot when it comes to, you talk about gambling with the most important thing that you have. That's it. And so the here again, do what? Right. It's whatever happens. If there is a God, then I've been good enough to get my way into heaven, whatever it may be. Incredibly dangerous way of living. But at the same time, you at least have a starting point with the agnostic. If you look at Paul in the Areopagus with the polytheistic culture of Athens, he had a starting point because at least they were open to the possibility of the unknown God. I mean, this is Paul's whole speech. His whole sermon right there in the Areopagus is, who you have been worshiping as unknown. Let me explain to you who it actually is. Let me make him known to you. And so as you approach an agnostic, this possibility that you talk about of there being a God, let me explain to you why there is a God. And then let me explain to you why the Christian God is God. And all others are just, imaginations and that sort of thing. And so it is a good jumping off point. Now, this is everybody got that? Now we're going to move into some muddy waters here. And so hang with me, write down questions or whatever you may have. I'll promise I'll address them either with the group or with you personally. All right. Theistic inquiry. Thinkers and philosophers, it's not just religious people. They have engaged with the conversation about the existence of God. It is the most important question that we can ask and answer for ourselves. And so throughout this time, some of the best thinkers have come up with rationales and arguments for explaining that the Lord must exist. Now again, we're gonna, towards the end, we're gonna bring this back into a Christian context, but for the moment, we're just engaging with the idea, how can we as people, as reasonably intelligent people, think and know that there is actually a God. All right, a couple of different arguments. First one is the ontological argument. This says that a concept of an omnipotent being, so the concept of a God, proves its existence. And so is there evidence that any other member of creation, so is there any evidence that any other organism or any other animal thinks of a God or worships of a God or has this type of understanding? Of course not. And so, I'm sorry, Rhonda, you're with your cat praying and everything, but yes, it's learned behavior. She wants her treat. But so as we think about the human race and humanity, how did this start? How did us gathering together to worship something start? Well, the ontological argument says that without there actually being that God who created and revealed himself in some way to his creation, our belief it was with the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. Other faiths have their own sort of belief about that. But that in and of itself, the idea of an omnipotent creator God who made everything that there is, points to the fact that he must exist. Because nothing else does what we do in terms of worship, in terms of thinking about life and death. They're either, running after the deer or they're running from the cheetah. They're not thinking about what happens if they get caught. And they've just seen it happen to other animals, and hey, I don't want that. And so ontology says, or ontological argument says, the concept of God proves that there is a God. Let's move to number 2, cosmological argument. Things exist from something powerful enough to cause it, powerful enough to create it. Things are brought into existence by things that are more powerful than them. And so you even think of the things that are stronger than us. You think of rock is stronger than bone. You think of metal is firmer than anything that we could possibly do. Well, until one of us shapes that or moves that or does anything to put it into a form that is anyhow useful, it's worth nothing. And so the things that exist, the things that are created, the things that are made, are always made by that which is greater than they are. And so I'll use the example of parents and children. When you have a child as a family, that thing depends on you for everything. If you just, this is not like I just saw, I don't know if it was Robbie City or somebody had the sea turtles on his Facebook. Did y'all see that? They had some turtles hatch, and we're not turtles, okay? If you have a baby and you just leave him in the beach, that thing's going to die. They require us for everything because we're greater than they are. And so the parent is. And so as we look at the human race, there has to be something greater than us that brought us into existence. Cosmology. Teleological argument. This is the intelligence and order point to a purposeful construction. We're going to talk a little bit about intelligent design later. This is not an intelligent design lecture. If you have strong feelings one way or the other about intelligent design, let's talk about it later. But the teleological argument says that if there is something of intelligence, if there's something of order, if there's something of purpose, then somebody had to put it that way. Because that sort of stuff doesn't happen on its own. Now, in the Christian sense, we can think more beyond this, more than just God. We can think of the sense that, okay, there is a God, and there is purpose, and there is order to things that He has made. Specifically, the 3 institutions that He has made. He has created purpose for the family, and we have instructions for that in the Bible. He has created purpose for the church, and we have instructions for that in the Bible. He has created purpose for government, and we have instructions for that in the Bible. And so, as in a Christian sense, it's not only that the intelligence and the organization and the order of these things points to the fact that somebody created them. As believers, that's part of our faith life too. How closely are we going to follow the order that God has made? It's not just that there is order, but how closely are we going to follow that order, even when it's difficult for us to do so. Existential argument. This is the argument for existence. Existential needs point to a purpose and a purposeful creator, and not just chance. And so, as we look at human beings as the top of the top of the worldly population, so to speak, in terms of intelligence, unless you find yourself in the middle of the ocean or on the Arctic tundra, you're probably the top of the food chain. You have things that can that puts you there and that sort of thing. And so we have this superior existence, you can say, to anything else that exists on earth. Well, why is it that some of our needs are different than lower life forms, lower organisms? If supposedly going back to secular humanism, and everything started from nothing and everything grew bigger from nothing, why is it that things that are far less than us are actually suited to live and have longer lives than us? And so, for instance, why is it that bacteria that has no intelligence, that has really no purpose other than make our life miserable, why is it that bacteria in the wrong person, in the wrong place, can actually kill a human being? Why is that? That makes no sense if everything gradually gets bigger and better and more important, and here again, Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, actually learns to live better than the previous existence. Why is it that something so small can still kill us if we're not careful? Did y'all see the news article about the 8-year-old boy who let a black widow bite him because he wanted to be Spider-Man? Yeah. He survived, everything's fine, but kids, don't do that. Don't let anything bite you because you want to be a superhero type thing. Because it's dangerous. That little itty bitty thing that, here again, has created purpose with ecosystems and stuff like that, but is not anywhere close to as great as a human being, can cause a great deal of damage for a human being because our needs are different than their needs are. Why is that? Why are our existential needs, our needs to continue living and exist, sometimes different and sometimes hindering us in ways that others are not? Existential argument. Anthropological argument. Personhood, morality, self-awareness point to God. Again, why are we here tonight? You could be doing anything. There's a family of deer that bed down in the woods behind my house. All right, they're not worried about coming in and learning about God and tithing and all these different things. They're doing whatever they want, and they know that we're in the city limits and nobody's going to shoot them. And so they're happy as they can be. So why are we here? What is the purpose of us being here? There's something in us, something in our self-awareness, something in our humanity that compels us to worship the one who created us, that compels us to recognize that he exists and come together with other like-minded people, not just for worship, but also for service in the name of God. Not because we want something special for ourselves, but because of the goodness of God. That's what separates us. Our personhood is more like God and his personhood than the other members of creation. It reflects on who he is, and that we would expect to see that if we're made in his image. Nothing else can boast of that. Moral argument. Absolute truth, morality, it all points to a divine creator. Gail King, our Sunday school director, always talks about presenting the Bible as absolute truth, and we have that here within the church in ways that other, again, people and even civilizations don't. There's some measure of truth, but it's not necessarily the same measure of truth. And so why is that? Even if they're not believers and even if they're not Christians, why do they have a measure of right and wrong and laws and a morality that's at least somewhat similar to ours? It's because it was given by someone. It was given by a creator. It's given by someone who is, again, bigger and better and more important than us. Otherwise, we would not have it. We would be just like the other members of creation who, you're going to do what I say. No, you're not. We're going to fight and find out who's the biggest and the baddest, and then the weakest is going to die or they're going to leave. That's not who we are. We have a standard of morality, and God gives us that standard of morality. All right. Who's totally lost? I'm interested. All right, y'all are liars. Somebody's not telling the truth here. All right, stick with me. All right. As we get into the pre-Enlightenment, but where we have the written record of thought really beginning to take shape, we have Aristotle, and a lot of Aristotle. Aristotle was the first one to really write down, thinking through that God must exist. And we don't think of that from a pagan like Aristotle. Aristotle was not a Christian. You will not get to talk to Aristotle in heaven, but he was incredibly smart and was an image bearer of God. And so he had 4 causes that point to the existence of God. The first is a material cause, and this basically says that necessary material that something is made of has to exist. And so for a table to exist, you have to have wood. part of our makeup physically is flesh and bone and structure. And that structure is different than other structures. That structure is different than non-living structures. That structure is different than static structures. And so where did that come from? If it did not exist at all times, which even the atheists will say it didn't, they say that matter isn't eternal. If it didn't exist at all times, then when did it start? And that same material can be used for different things. And so just using the example of wood again, you can have wood and you can form it into a table. You can have that same type of wood and you can form it into a baseball bat. And you can have even more of that same type of wood and you can form it into something else. And when you see that wood occur naturally, it's a tree. And so it's different forms, but it's the same material, and that material's got to come from somewhere. And that's where he moves into the formal cause, which is what he calls potential that has not yet been actualized. And so this is the language that you hear from Aristotelian philosophy. So you go back to the table, you have wood, maybe some of it is flat, maybe some of it is cylindrical, but it doesn't look like tabletop and table legs yet. And so it's potential, but it's not actualized. Stick with me. Efficient cause. This is the thing that triggers the action. This is what we would think of as being most like the cause. He called it the proximate mover. And so if you've got wood and you've got an idea, what do you need to make a table? A carpenter. Whoever said that is absolutely right. Okay? You don't need Lance Cole because you're still not going to have a table at the end of it. If you got all this stuff and you want a table, you have to have a carpenter. And this is what Aristotle calls the proximate mover. This is the one who puts that potential into purpose. And then the final cause, this is the purpose. This is what actually happens when something has reached its potential. And that change takes place when the material reaches the purpose in which it was created for. And so if this is true of everything, not just humanity, then we've got to have someone with immense power who's able to create all of these different things, create all of these different materials, create all of these different forms. And this is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. This is probably, when it comes to Christianity, this is probably Aristotle's most, he didn't even realize he was doing it. It is his most useful idea. Because Aristotle said for all of this to happen, all of this potential to be formed into something useful, to be formed into something that has purpose, what you have to have is, again, he called it the unmoved mover, someone who is able to be that carpenter to everything that there is. And so he would call that someone who has fully actualized potential. It's not just potential, but it's fully actualized potential. He said apart from that, and again, Aristotle was just as much a scientist as he was a philosopher. People don't realize that about him, but he really was. He said apart from that, nothing can exist. If you don't have the proximate mover, if you don't have the person who's going to create all of that thing and give it form and shape and structure and purpose, then it can't exist. And so when you look at everything that there is, what does that require? It requires the unmoved mover. It requires the fully actualized potential. It requires God. Now, Aristotle was a polytheist. He was a person of his area and his time, and where the gospel had not reached, and these sorts of things. And so he certainly did not believe in the Judeo-Christian God or even the Yahwistic God. But again, he had enough of the image of God and listened enough to the image of God to realize there has to be someone. It's not just something. There has to be someone who puts all of this stuff into motion and makes all of this have structure and form and purpose. And that moves into Thomas Aquinas, who is known as the Aristotle of the Middle Ages, and he really puts Aristotelian philosophy into a Christian context. He was a monk. Aquinas is a fascinating guy. I love talking about Aquinas. I'll give you just one little. I'll break up the heavy and give you one little tidbit of information. Thomas Aquinas came from a very wealthy family, and they wanted him to go into the law. They wanted him to go and study the law and be a respectable person, possibly go into politics and all this sort of stuff. And so they were going to send him off to school, and he said, no, I'm going to the seminary, I'm going to be a priest. And they said, no, you're not. So they essentially kidnapped him, is what they do. They lock him in his room, and they do not let him out. And finally, they what are you looking at? Finally, they go and they hire a prostitute and stick him in his room to try and convince him not to be a priest. And of course, it didn't happen. He goes and he's a priest and a philosopher and a great theologian. But man, you talk about absolutely not wanting your son to go into ministry. That is a long way to go to try and keep that person out of seminary. So that did not happen. My parents were happy to send me to seminary. But anyway, back to the heavy. All right, so 5 ways. Aquinas sort of branched onto the 4 causes of Aristotle, and he came up with 5 ways, or what's sometimes called 5 proofs of God. The first is motion. To start motion and avoid regress, something must impart that motion. And so, for instance, you take this water bottle right here, and I stick this on the table. All right? How long is that thing going to sit there without something moving it? Forever. Okay? And so lots of things can move it. You could have a strong wind. You could have, the building could collapse. Somebody could come and knock it over. I could come and take a drink or whatever. But without someone causing motion, then static objects are not going to go into motion. They're just not. And so you look at creation in the universe. You don't even just look at us and on planet Earth and the motion that we have and the things that we do. You just look at that gravity and the heavenly bodies and all of the things that exist. They're all in motion. And Aristotle is saying for something to be in motion, they have to have a cause to be in motion. They don't just do it themselves. And so that's his first one. Second one is called the efficient cause. This comes from Aristotle, and it says no complete thing can be its own cause, can be its own existence. And Christian apologists have really branched onto this, especially with thermodynamics. And I only know anything about thermodynamics because of philosophy class. I am not a physicist by any means. But first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy, says that energy can be converted from one thing to another but cannot be created or destroyed. So you want to generate electricity. You've got to get that power from somewhere else. Hydroelectric, wind, burning fuel, something. You've got to transfer energy from one place to another. It cannot be created or destroyed. This is science who says this. Okay? And then on with first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy, you have the law of conservation of mass. And it basically says that this is true of matter as well. Just in the same way with energy, matter, physical substance, cannot be created or destroyed. It can just be transferred. And so you've got something, you can burn it up, but that mass is transferred into fire, or that mass is transferred into ash or water or dissolved or whatever it may be. It cannot you cannot create it out of nothing. Well, what is the understanding of a secular humanist existence? Okay, so you take this chair right over here beside Sharon. All right, if you were walking through the woods and you see this chair sitting in the middle of the woods, are you going to think, wow, how much time must it have taken for that chair to put all those screws in itself and to arrange it in a particular way and for it to look like that? I mean, it must have taken millions and millions and millions of years for it to look just like that. Or are you going to think that thing came from a factory and somebody put that together? You know what I mean? And so essentially what this is saying is nothing. You're not even getting into the teleological argument. You're not even getting to the design of it. You're just getting into the matter itself. Nothing can create itself from nothing. And so you look at an atheistic, a secular humanistic view of the beginnings of life. Basically what they say is that everything that we have was a result of time and pressure and chance from matter the size of a pinhead that just exploded in a big bang and created everything that we have. And so there you will look at the understanding, and that actually breaks the first law of thermodynamics. So you're looking at the understanding of a secular humanist way of creating a life requires one miracle. They can't explain it. We can't explain how it happened, but this happened. Even taking God out of the equation requires one miracle for their understanding of how life began. And Aquinas and Aristotle and other people say it's much more simple to think that chair was created in a factory. It just didn't happen like that among a bunch of sticks and rocks and everything else that there is. Third way, necessity. Difference between possible and necessary existence. This is it's possible. I'll put it this way: the difference between possible and necessary existence. Is it necessary for me to exist for my parents to exist? No, it's not. Is it necessary for my parents to exist for me to exist? Yes. Okay. That's the difference between possible versus necessary existence. And what this says is there are some things that are necessary for other things to exist, God being one of those things. And so in the same way that my parents could have decided not to have any children, and they could have gone through their life, and they could have done, X, Y, Z, lots of different things, but I would not have been here. In the same way, there's a lot that God could have done, but in order for us to be here, He had to have created us. And, I've always wondered, one of the curious things in my brain is, what was God doing before He created us? There's no telling. There's literally infinite possibilities. But hope, I like to think that we're interesting. Whatever He was doing, that we grabbed His attention in some way. But number 4, degree, or sometimes the argument of gradation. Things progress from unimportant to supremely important. So you have dirt, organisms, plants, animals, people, God. This can be different for different people. I saw maybe I shouldn't say this. I'm going to say it. All right. I saw this billboard, and it was a PETA billboard. Protecting animals and that sort of thing. And it had a whole bunch of animals, and it started from small and then went up to human beings. And it was talking about the animals that we eat and things like that. And it says, where do you draw the line? Because it had chickens and cows and pigs, and then it had children and people. Well, somebody went up with a red can of spray paint and sprayed a line that says right there, where you draw the line, right there. We'll eat the chickens and the pigs and the cows, but we'll leave the horses and the dogs and the cats and everything else alone. I don't know. That's funny to me. All right, number 5, design. This is essentially the teleological argument. Life shows purpose and order, therefore it has an organizer. This is the foundation to intelligent design. And just here, one quick word about intelligent design. Intelligent design may have been started by people of the Christian faith. Intelligent design itself is not a Christian movement. There are tons and tons and tons of people who are agnostic that believe in intelligent design over evolution. And so when you're looking at that, the foundation of the intelligent design movement, and I took a class in seminary from a guy named Charles Woodward, who is he's the historian of the intelligent design movement. And so he's sort of tracked everything throughout the years. But the foundation of it is that the world, with its life and its how it's revolves around the sun, and the fact that this is the only place that life could exist, with our distance and our orbit around our star and all these different things, this is too perfect a design for it to happen by chance. So the foundation of the intelligent design movement was the teleological argument that the purposeful design in and of itself shows that it has to have a designer. And lots of people have branched on or latched on to the Christian idea of the designer, but it doesn't have to. It can be an agnostic person. Probably the most famous one would be a guy named Dave Berlinski, who's a philosopher mathematician. I think he's French. But agnostic, still agnostic. Charles Woodward used to say that he hopes Dave Berlinski is saved 10 minutes before the rapture, because it's just he's a voice that shows this is not just a religious movement. It's a rational type of thought. Very quickly, philosopher by the name of Edward Fazer. He has 5 proofs of the existence of God. And he basically looks at 5 different philosophers to show this. Aristotle, motion. If something changes, it needs to have a changer. It goes back to the unmoved mover. Plotinus, which is essentially Neoplatonic type of cosmology, looks at composition. Something cannot cause its own existence. It cannot create its own material. It has to come from something. Augustine, logic and universal truth. Immutable truth proves the existence of God. So even outside of philosophy and religion and everything else, there are immutable truths, things that are going to be this way, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you do. This is true. Even if they were trying to change math now, math is an immutable truth. Aquinas designed teleological argument, basically. Leibniz is rationalist proof through the principle of sufficient reason. Basically, the principle of sufficient reason says that just because we can't explain it right now doesn't mean that it's not explainable. And so just because we can't prove the existence of God, if scientifically, empirically, if it is the most rational way in which everything is here, then we can trust that is indeed the way in which everything has happened. All right, real quickly, here we get into the Bible. The Bible actually talks about it doesn't seek to prove God's existence. It assumes God's existence, but it does express a strong doctrine of natural revelation. Back from bibliology, somebody explained to me the difference between natural revelation or general revelation and specific revelation. I'm so proud of y'all. It is. Very first session. You're right, Connie. General or natural revelation, things that all people can know about God, no matter who they are. Specific revelation is or special revelation as it's called, is the things that God has revealed to us. The Bible, special revelation. Okay? What we can know of God just by looking at nature, general revelation, natural revelation. And so the Bible has a testimony for special revelation. It has a huge amount to say about natural or general revelation as well. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and they were without form. Do you know why planets are round? Does anybody know why planets are round? Why there's not a square planet somewhere that we found? Yes, the gravitational rotation, it orbits something. It naturally pulls it into a spherical shape, the Earth. Okay? In the beginning, it says that the God created heavens and the earth was without form. And so as I read that, what I'm seeing is as God's creating the earth, as God's creating the planets and all that sort of, He also creates the law of gravity at the same time to put these into you. It's not as if gravity can exist apart from God, and it's not as if because gravity pulls these planets into a spherical shape, then it must not have been God. It's that God created this law at the same time He created the substance, and it brought it into form where it was formless. So something for you guys to think about there. Job 38:4. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture. God just smacking down Job. He's complaining. He basically says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" And then he continues on throughout the verse, chapter 38, basically saying, "I did this, I did this, I did this. Did you see it? Oh no, you didn't. You weren't even here. And so you're explaining to me the things of the world." But again, He laid the foundation of the earth. Psalm 14, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So sorry, Nietzsche. Psalm 19, the heavens and the sky declare God's glory and handiwork. Psalm 90, before the earth was formed, you are God from everlasting to everlasting. He's doing something. He is the unmoved mover, the fully actualized potential. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then the Word became flesh. Acts 17, God who made the earth and all things in it does not live in temples. And so we have this man-made structure, but that doesn't mean that God is bound there because He is boundless. None of His creation holds Him holds him in one place or the other. Romans chapter 1:20, circle this one, underline it, highlight it, whatever you do. This is the verse for general revelation. God's attributes and power are clear, and because of that, all are without excuse. I'm going to flip real quickly. We got another minute and a half. Let me just read this entire passage. We've read it before, but for his, being God, invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. And so essentially, theology proper has been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they, being everyone else, being the rebellious, being those who don't trust in the sacrifice of Christ Jesus, so that they are without excuse. So none of us have a good reason for not believing in God. 1 Corinthians 2, the natural person, the unbelieving person, does not accept the things of God because they are spiritually discerned. And then Jude 1:22, I just included this one in here as we're closing out tonight. Have mercy on those who doubt. Don't think of, as we've gone through all of this, and y'all have stuck with me, and I'm very, very proud of y'all. Have mercy on those who don't see the benefit of it. Have mercy on those who don't understand yet the God who loves them enough not only to create them and create this world for them to live in, but also to send his son Jesus to die for them. Have mercy on those who doubt and try and help them along their way. This was the hardest one. Thank you guys for sticking with me. Really quickly, it's 7 o'clock, but really quickly, any questions? You're like, just let me out of here. Get me out of this room. Take that sheet with you, and especially some of the arguments and things like that. If you have some time, Google it. Look up some of these things, learn it a little bit more deeply. Find out where you're getting your source material from. Make sure it's not, Richard Dawkins or someone like that. But it is something else that to do your own personal study. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let me pray for us. I'm going to stay up here just to chat if anybody wants to, but let me dismiss us in prayer. Heavenly Father, we do thank you so much for your goodness and your grace, Lord. There's so much that we still don't understand. There's so much that is unknown to us because we're still finite in our knowledge. We're still imperfect in our thoughts, but we trust that you are perfect, and we just thank you for giving us the reasoning and the ability to look at the sun and the moon and the stars, to look at the earth and its orbit, to look at the creation that you have placed all around us, and know that there is a God, and then to know that you have sent your guidance, and you have sent your Son, and you have given us the specifics of how we can serve you and please you with our life. And so we thank you so much for this time together, and for just allowing us to be your people. Watch over us and protect us as we go home. Bring us back on Sunday as we worship again together. In Jesus' name,